Welcome to Hacking HR, Reskilling and Upskilling the Workforce. My name is Jen Phillips Kirkwood. I'm on the Future of Work team at ADP. And today, Enrique Rubio and Hacking HR have really prepared what I would call a 6-course global gourmet meal for you, with each panel today being a decadent course to savor. So get ready. You're going to meet some of the world's most reputed thought leaders and authors on the future of work. Each panel today builds. So I hope you meet me back on our last panel today at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific to enjoy the finale. So these ideas, the debates, and the research around the future of work and digital transformation are meaningless without your voice. So we want to hear you today. Please make sure you're interacting in LinkedIn Live. Let us know where you are and your thoughts as we go through, and we will be showcasing your voices and your ideas as well. So first up today, let's get started. We dive deep into this thing of the modern global workforce. We're talking about the innovation and ideation on reskilling and upskilling, because we know the race is on. The race is on to embrace the new workers, to identify, to understand who they are, to develop these things of dynamic teams, because there is a new way of work, and work is getting done in an oh so different way, especially globally. You're going to leverage and be able to have these ideas to leverage meaningful innovation and have agility. Huge factor that we want to talk about today is what is your agility in being able to play that critical role in your organization, because it's not just about your organization's success. As we know, it's about survival. So help me welcome our rock stars, and please continue to weigh in from where you are across the world, and help welcome Barcelona and Canada and Detroit. All right. So let's get started with our panel. First up, please meet Kelley Steven-Waiss, who serves as Executive Vice President, Chief Human Resources for Here Technologies, and founder of Hitch. Past, she was Executive Vice President, Chief Human Resources for Extreme Networks, Inc. And she was responsible for the company's global human capital strategies. By the way, this busy woman, who's a mother as well, has a book coming in April on this very relevant topic that we're talking about today, the inside gig. Sheri Feinzig is an executive with IBM's talent and transformation practice. Extensive experience in HR research, consulting, and business transformation. She's a professor in her free time at New York City's Human Capital Analytics and Tech program, and co-author of this workforce analytics book, which is actually one of my personal favorites now, The Power of People. Last but not least, Steve Rader is the founder and CEO of Crowd Resources Consulting. He provides speaking and consulting opportunities around innovation and our favorite, the future of work. This is his side gig. Yep, his side gig. His full-time job is actually serving as some organization called NASA as deputy manager in their Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. Whew, what a mouthful. Which, by the way, works to infuse and crowdsource innovation approaches at NASA. He works across the federal government, that has its own challenges in its own, and he's worked at NASA's Johnson Space Center for over 30 years. So Kelley, Sheri, Steven, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. What an incredible intro. Like, I have goosebumps just announcing this. So let's get started. You know what, Sheri, I'm going to pivot to you first. Talk to me first and level set. What are reskilling and upskilling, and what's the relationship between them?
Yeah, sure. So upskilling really refers to enhancing one's capabilities to do the job that the person has today. So it's kind of expanding your skill set, getting better at the job that you have, to make sure that your skills in the job don't become obsolete. Reskilling refers to really kind of learning to do a whole different job entirely. So, you know, there's clearly relationships there. There are some core skills that are going to be transferable across different jobs, but that's kind of the way that I think of the distinction, is to reskilling, get you ready for a different job, for a career move to maybe more high demand job, whereas upskilling is getting better at the job that you have to keep you employable.
Okay, so I'd love Kelley and Steven also weigh in from just a foundational standpoint, but at the same time, I'd love to hear from our audience. Please weigh in on LinkedIn Live. Have you started in your organization working on this reskilling or upskilling effort? And where are you in this type of maturity curve? So Kelley, I'll defer to you. Anything you'd like to add in from that foundation as it relates to this concept of reskilling and upskilling in the future of work?
I think, the main point to add to Sheri's, because she so eloquently described it, is that I think we're going to have to tap into the motivations of people to reskill and upskill themselves. So we're going to have to know a little bit more about them. We're going to have to give them some insights into the skills that they have today that transfer, and those skills that they may need to develop, so that we can steer them in the right direction. But I think the key point is motivation. We want to go in the direction of which they will have the ability to reskill and upskill. And therefore, I think if we do that at scale, obviously we have a high performing organization and we don't leave anyone behind.
So Steven, what do you think the benefits to the employees are for the reskilling and upskilling?
Well, I mean, this is going to be a mandatory thing here, right? Because the technology changes that are upon us, they're not even coming anymore, they're here, are really changing the landscape of work so fast, right? And it's the rate that the automation is taking and doing new things that's driving this new need to skill faster than we used to, right? So used to, you could go back to school, you could take some years, you could go and do that, and now the need is coming much faster. And so if you don't want to find yourself without a job, you've got to find a way to continue to learn. Lifelong learning is the new way. And I think depending on where you are, that may be something that's going to be a problem in a few years, and in other places it's already a problem, right? So, and I'll just add, I don't think businesses have been in the job of keeping their workforce up to snuff, right? The average that companies spend on training is something like $1,000 per employee per year. That's mostly IT and security training. That's not upskilling or reskilling, right? And so I think companies are already seeing that they can't find the talent they need for all of these new technologies. And so they're going to have to re-gear as well.
So I love that Heather at Pathways is saying that she's already working on some of the upskilling. Elka is already saying that they are working on the process for upskilling, and they're really excited to hear these other ideas. I love that we do have these folks that are already familiar with this concept, thank God, because there's no time to wait, right? Like the pressure is on, not just with the skills gap, but from the learning component.
Yeah, and I think that point that you make is really important also, because you shouldn't wait until automation disrupts your business model or your roles in the company. I think we need to be proactive about looking, ahead and determining what changes are coming down the pike, and how should we develop the muscle in organizations for this type of change before it hits us. I think that I'm curious of those that are out there on LinkedIn Live, if there was a burning platform for change that sort of steered them in that direction, or they were being very proactive in seeing something coming and what those inputs might have been.
Great call out, Kelley. So you heard it, LinkedIn audience. We want to hear if you've had a provocation, something that provoked you early on. And in the meantime, Sheri, tell me, what do you think in terms of companies, if there isn't an event, as Kelley's describing, if there's nothing that provokes somebody to look into this early, what do you think the size and type of companies are that are best suited to lean in now if they haven't already?
I think really any company needs to be thinking about the skills that they need today and in the future. The way that you go about that will probably vary depending on the size of the organization. I think for large organizations, you need some really well thought out systematic approaches to understand what skills do you have today, what skills do you need to compete today and in the future, what's the gap that you have, and how do you close that gap. And there's been an ongoing concern in terms of burning platform, but we're hearing in our research, we're seeing in other research, and just an ongoing pervasive concern among executives of not having the skills that they need in order to compete. So clearly there's an issue there that needs to be tackled.
Okay. Kelley, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I would say, to Sheri's point, we need to start managing what I call the skills supply chain, much so talent assets like we would capital assets. We need to look across that supply, understanding the supply and demand scenarios in the market. In many of these skill domains like data science, artificial intelligence, just to name a few, these are in high demand and low supply. So as an organization, we're going to have to understand, how do we build? If we can't buy, how do we build? How do we strategize from the inside to build? Because to Steve's point, we can't send people away for a new degree. There isn't the time for that. So we're going to have to move people around, give them opportunities to learn while on the job or build those skills on the job. And this is sort of a new phenomenon really driven by speed, and it's going to take a lot of organizational agility to execute that.
Right, and there is quite a lot of talent within organizations. With all this lamenting of not having the skills you need, there is the opportunity to develop the skills and the talent that you have in the organization by being thoughtful and methodical about it. There's quite a bit of research that suggests there are a lot of benefits to increasing internal mobility and utilizing the skills and the talent that you have. There's research that shows that people perform better, at least in the first couple of years, when it's an internal transfer versus an external hire. It's cheaper to move people rather than hire from the outside. So a lot of benefits from really putting a systematic internal mobility program into place.
I just want to add in, I think there's really another component to this, and that is the trend towards open labor, right? There is a migration going on right now where people are leaving organizations and going and doing freelance work more and more. I think they're increasing at something like 3 times the rate of regular employment. There's one projection I've seen that by 2027, there'll be more freelance and gig workers than regular employees. That's a huge shift going on, and it's being driven by workers leaving. And I think part of that is because in the freelance world, they upskill naturally. They are out there learning and realizing that they can take those skills and shop them around to lots of different places. And I think that's going to really put pressure on companies to up their game on training just to be able to maintain people, because the old model was we capture people, we make them our assets, and they really don't learn, at least not the cutting edge stuff. They're all kind of learning the internal stuff. And with the rapid change in technologies, this day and age, they're really cut off from the most important stuff going on unless we actively get out there and train them. So.
And I'll add
I will tell you, hold on, Steven, I just want to tell you there is several questions going on right now that they do want to know, how do you upskill astronauts when they're on the moon? So to all of you that have been asking that question, I do need to make sure I insert that. That is an interesting equation, I'll just say. It's a good levity for this morning.
Well, it's funny because that's actually significant. When we put people out, when NASA puts people out on other planetary bodies for long periods of time, training, proficiency training is a huge deal, right? Because typically astronauts go through 1 to 2 years of really intense training on every little thing, and that's not possible once you get out there. So that's probably a whole nother deal. But yes.
Kelley, I'm sorry, were you going to say something? Or Sheri?
Oh, I was just going to say that the internal mobility comment, obviously I have a lot of passion around this issue, that we really need to understand how to move people around. And the fact that people are going to the gig economy and the outside is because we're not providing that democratization of work, that ability to give them choice, open up, what does the work look like, how can I move around? And having visibility as an organization to what we have and how to do that. So I think if people want to be part of a tribe, and if we can create that tribal impact inside, but also the benefits of the gig economy and the outside, that's what I refer to as the inside gig. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to have, as Sheri talked about, an internal mobility strategy. And if we're able to visualize all those skills and have that data and information, we'll be more successful.
And Steve, to your point around the gig economy, we can bring that concept into organizations to give people the opportunity to build their skills within that same kind of concept within the organization.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to some GM folks a couple of years ago, and they actually did exactly that. They said, we noticed a bunch of our folks are heading out to the gig economy, and we want them to be part of GM, and they came here because they were passionate about cars, and so they started offering for those folks that wanted to work on concept cars, because there are always not enough funds to do the future stuff. Anyone could come work. The only thing that they got cleared with their middle managers is you had to get your day job done if you wanted to go work a concept car. Well, all these people wanted to do that, right? Because who doesn't want to work on a concept car? And so what happened was those people became more productive in their day jobs because they wanted to be able to do this job that they were then doing for free. And so a company was able to redirect kind of the passion back into the company, which I thought was really kind of a nice model for how to do that.
So we're also getting a lot of questions out here, since we have a pause here, that leadership plays a really pivotal role. I know I met with an executive formerly of Cummins Engine. So for those who are from Indianapolis out there, or Indiana out there, shout out to you. And he was sharing when they started their approach to using gig work. And I think there's this big misnomer that gig work is all Uber drivers. And of course they're not. So just level setting that for a minute. But he said he leaned into it with their operations and IT team. They were looking to bring in workers, but really had to preserve and watch for the employee morale. And seriously, so the leader was very key to that type of use case. Tell me what you think about that leadership development and preserving or elevating the morale of the team.
So I think that's incredibly important. Kelley, you talked in the beginning about the motivation of the individual to keep their skills up to date. And part of that motivation is going to come from the culture within the organization to support it. Some of that's got to come from the individual, obviously, but you need the entire culture, context, ecosystem to support upskilling and reskilling, and leadership is a key component of that. Being the type of leadership that allows people to take chances and try different things, gigs within the organization or what have you, not be penalized for that in any way. Being willing to let people move on to different roles. Not all managers and leaders are willing to let go of their good people, but better to have them go somewhere else in the organization than leave entirely. So many aspects of leadership that are critically important for this to be successful.
Yeah, and Sheri, I would say, I refer to something in our own leadership framework at Here Technologies where Hitch was incubated, is that leaders need to become talent architects. So when they're working with the workforce, they need to consider a lot of different factors. The culture needs to support the movement and talent sharing across units. So Steven actually referred to capacity. So you're tapping the capacity in the organization. You're boosting morale because you're giving people choice. And when leaders understand this abundance versus scarcity model, that they're actually tapping into the entire enterprise, and employees discover that they have this movement, managers and leaders end up retaining a lot more of their people in their home base when they allow them some of this movement. But it takes to build that, what I call mosaic, as a leader, by moving tiles around and getting the right tiles into your mosaic. That's a true talent architect, and that's we need to teach leaders how to do this well.
I'd add on to that. I would go even farther and say that in the future, as we move into this faster moving pace, that we're going to have to come to terms with a hybrid workforce that's both open and internal. And one of the ways, this will be controversial, I'm sure, but actually, if companies started offering to their employees the opportunity to go do gig work, to do some of these crowd communities where there's a lot of learning and experience going on, that seems very counterintuitive. But that's, you go to, say, a top coder or a Paro.io, where that's where the upskilling's happening, right? And if you think about it, somebody else is paying them if they're getting money. If they're not getting money, it's still training. And if you initiate it, you can form the parameters around it, kind of like GM did with that internal, right? So you can actually say, hey, for 10 hours a week, I want you to get out there and actually join this community and learn some new stuff on data science and start to get experience. And if you win a prize or you make some money, that's fine. think about that. You're not paying for that training, and they're doing it themselves. And if they can get money and permission, that's going to energize that workforce, and it's going to make them more comfortable with the gig economy, so that as you start bringing gig workers in, and I say gig, as you start bringing open labor in, which is not necessarily gig, but it can be people that you form relationships with. Paul Less is going to talk later today. He did some amazing stuff where he basically got rid of a lot of his kind of existing support and told his entire team at Microsoft when he was there, hey, go start using gig work, start using this enterprise Upwork account. And what he found was they made their own little teams. They stopped doing the work they didn't enjoy. They started focusing on what was their passion, and then using the gig workers to actually do the rest of it. And their productivity went higher, their happiness went higher, like their job satisfaction went higher. So there are ways to do this and to migrate in that I think are really exciting, but it's going to take a little leap of faith. I kind of think it's like, remember when you first heard about Uber and people were like, there's no way I'm ever getting in the car with a stranger. And now you get in the car with a stranger all the time. That trust element's coming. So.
Yeah, I remember when elevators had they had people in the elevator to take people up, because no one would step into an elevator unless no one step into a machine unless someone was in it. Now we don't even think about it. So you're absolutely right.
But I would argue that I think these types of changes and transformations really need to be designed thoughtfully rather than just kind of organically evolving, because otherwise, you really are not thinking through potential unintended consequences. So, for example, if we think about a large proportion of the workforce starting to be gig workers that, they're just coming in and out, that's great, but how does that fit with the core of the organization, fit into the culture? You don't want a bifurcation of the workforce with the regular employees and the contract workers not being treated the same. And, we've seen some issues arise from that. In some high profile situations.
Yeah, I think talent optimization was also a key thing about it, looking at the internal workforce, because the assumption is we really don't know who we have in organizations today, because we haven't, either we're acquiring new companies so many times that we've lost track. And skills is that common denominator. So if we can actually expose the skills in the organization, we might find that we have a lot more supply than we thought. And I think we should, where we own culture and we can actually create an environment of movement and high morale. I think, to my point earlier, I think people want to be a part of something. And so when they're on the outside only and they have to go try to find their own work or multiple sources of revenue, it's stress. It's stress to be able to keep that up. I do agree with Steve, though, that going out and reskilling yourself is, to be rewarded, certainly, and the company does not have to pay for that. They shouldn't punish you, certainly, for doing that. But I think we have to not forget to look inside the organization to make sure we're optimizing.
So we're getting a lot of questions out here, and I want to make sure we acknowledge for the audience of what we're getting to next, which is the how and the tech, because they're drooling out here. And we're also got a couple comments I want to call out that I think are remarkable. One, I want to talk in a minute about the soft skills. Rachel Druckenmiller has some questions on soft skills and how to assess soft skills. And then Monique Garlington as well had said, is HR really aware of all the inside gig workers that's already going on? Kind of to the point with Steven today, right? We have Steven's already doing gig work. I think many of us are doing gig work or different consulting aspects with day jobs and other types of jobs. So are we aware of that? Do we have the visibility? Does HR have the visibility to see who are the workers that are in my organization? Because as someone else said, often, as Marianne had said, often procurement has this information. Procurement is the one that owns the line of sight. So let me take a pause and start with Sheri. Tell me your thoughts on, what we're talking about with how do we gain sight into the teams, because this is getting into the how and leading to the technology. And then talk to me in terms of how is HR able to see these type of workers and recognize that work is being done in a new way?
Right. So on that point around procurement, dealing with the external or the contract workers, that's part of my point of treating the workforces differently and some challenges that arise because HR doesn't have that visibility typically and the access to the data to really understand what the full workforce is that's contributing to an organization if they're separated that way. So I think we really need to think about the ability to bring together a visibility of the entire workforce that's contributing at any one time. And in terms of understanding what you have, from the most basic of conducting skills inventories, which can be very laborious and painful, but really important to have a baseline of what skills you have in order to figure out what do you need, what's the gap. There are some newer ways to do that. So for example, IBM used to rely on the old employee self-assessment, manager validation to try to inventory skills, quickly becomes out of date, do people take it seriously, et cetera, goes into a black hole, all those challenges. And so what we've been doing internally instead is a skills inference approach, where we kind of look at people's digital footprints, so to speak, and infer what their skills are from their resume, their profiles, their work products, etc. We then surface those skills inferences to the employees so that they can validate them. They have the opportunity to validate them. And I think that surfacing is really motivating to encourage people to keep their skills up to date. And what we found is save thousands and thousands of hours, and it's more accurate and up to date, timely. So different creative ways to think about inventorying skills, but really important to understand what it is you have.
I think it's really interesting to hear the HR perspective on that, because in the open labor platforms, the Upworks and the freelancers, they're actually, tracking the digital exhaust, right, of every single employee or worker, so that they see were they on time, what was their rating, what exact skill were they doing. And they actually, I think, are actually ahead of most of those systems in doing similar work, but it's kind of different as well, to kind of match people, right? These are, you talked, Kristen, a little bit about how, people are out on their own finding work. A lot of these new matching platforms like Upwork and Freelancer and Paro.io and TopTal and Maven, they're finding the work for the people and just feeding it to them, right? And that's I think one of the reasons there's a shift, and they're doing that matching using machine learning because they have all this kind of data, right? So Paro.io is a great example. They can match you up with an accountant that has very specialized skills because they have all of that digital exhaust, all of that information that then they can find exactly, that accountant in Idaho that knows tax law and HIPAA regulations, right? And can get you really set up with that right person.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to what the other panelists have said about this in terms of Hitch, which is the technology that we incubated at Here Technologies, which looks at digital footprint of employees, inventory skills based on profiles, and those skills that Sheri talked about, which are aspired, inferred, demonstrated, or a level of expertise. And that's how we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to match. So we're looking at a lot of that data. And we also are able to inventory our skills supply chain, which tells us where we have gaps. And certainly we can see that supply and demand visually, which as an HR leader, you can imagine, if your CEO comes to you and says, how much data science capability do I have? It used to be that you go to the HCM system and look at how many people with the title data science do I have. Now I could actually look on the basis of skills as that denominator and say, CEO, your supply looks like this. Our demand for these services in the talent marketplace is X, and therefore here is our gap and what we should proactively plan for. Now do we build or we buy? So to Sheri's point, this has to be carefully thought through, foundationally and systemically, has to be part of your cultural fabric.
So let me share with you some comments and some ideas. So Nicolina Wilson is out there, and thank you, Nicolina, for sharing your thoughts, because she actually just said we propose an internal gig working site at a Shark Tank event held at our company. I know we've done similar events. I think it's a great innovation idea and a way to capture ideas. They were given the green light to find a tool and implement it internally. And there were pieces of the skills profiling and manager approval in their LMS, but really needed other components that they couldn't find. They didn't have an optimal solution, so they felt limited. So let's talk about that technology ecosystem, getting into more of the, how do we do this? How do we do it at scale? One, we need the line of sight and the visibility into the jobs. And I would also say that I worked with a former Walgreens executive last week who was sharing his story that sometimes it's grossly underestimated the jobs, that we think there's only W-2 jobs on a career portal, but we really need to take a different lens to those jobs and say 4 to 10x type of backfill on those jobs, potentially as a gig worker. And if we start thinking about that, and again, shaping the teams that way, that gives us an entree into identifying it, getting that visibility. And now if we're thinking of this highly matrix, potentially organization, let's be honest, I think that intimidates the hell out of sometimes the IT and HR teams going, how are we going to see this? So talk to me about the tech and the ecosystems. Kelley, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the word job, because I think that what we're going to see in the future is that we're going to break the job down and it's going to be about work. So, and work needs a set of services and skills associated with those services. And that's what really allows us to bring multiple people into what we would have called a role. And so we will have core teams that have a job for a long period of time, but we're going to be inviting this new scenario where we're breaking this down. And that's what the technology is going to help us do. It's going to help us break down what was traditionally a job into a set of services. So think of, rather than a data engineer, data engineering as a service, and breaking that service down into what about a data engineering were the skills that we were looking for. So you get that specialized skill set that Steve talked about for the outside gig economy that you can do for the inside. And then it's about how to deploy so that you use the matching to make sure that you have the right people on the work, and then you can stand up all these agile teams. So that's just the one point I wanted to make about this, is that I think it's not about jobs. I think it's about work.
I couldn't agree more.
I agree, and Marcus Buckingham would say work is done in the team. So Steven, tell us what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think that's exactly right. It's about the tasks that you're trying to get done. You know, some of the resistance we're seeing, right, and not a resistance, I would say, some of the cultural angst, right, is that we're in a big transition right now, right? The 40-hour work week is being brought into question, right? Is that a construct that's going to survive? And as more and more people go to this gig model, like Sheri said, there are lots of issues to be worked out around benefits, around portability of your reputation, around the laws, around fairness. But it's kind of coming, right? And I think the one construct, this gig construct, is going to start influencing more and more these corporate organizational constructs, and it's going to have a lot of discomfort around that because there is so much that's changing there, and it will be interesting just to watch how that optimization happens. But I think I would say watch out when we start really claiming as if the 40-hour work week is this, and the traditional model is how I should probably call it. That traditional model is sacrosanct, because it's just not. It's if I always look at it this way, we're in a race, right? Automation really is going to take large swaths of tasks that make up jobs, right? And the question is, can we pivot fast enough to a workforce that can adapt to the new jobs that are coming? And what I'm seeing is that the gig workforce can actually do that much, much faster than our corporate organizations. And so we can try to resist, but honestly, I think the secret to us making that pivot and surviving that as a society, because there will be angst. I would say there's already angst that you're seeing with the UAW strike, with the yellow vests in Paris. Like, we're on the edge here, right? And companies are going to always kind of push back and say, we want to stay in the nice, comfortable thing that we've had for 100 years. And that's natural, but it's also a little at our own peril, right?
And Steve, to your point about the social unrest and not addressing that proactively as these changes are happening, I think it's really important to recognize that in order for all of these things we're talking about to work, you need data. And you need everyone's, visibility of everyone to participate. Otherwise, you end up getting swaths of people being left behind. And I think it's really important to think about that. If we're talking about tech jobs and the types of jobs that have lent themselves well to these types of skill development efforts and so forth, that's one part of the economy and the working population. We need to think broadly about everybody and proactively getting ahead of not leaving people behind, because we see the consequences of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we have to think about the fact that most people, there was a study about this recently, and Deloitte talks about it in The Rise of the Social Enterprise, that people do not trust governments to take care of them and make sure they're not left behind. There's more pressure on the corporate world to reskill and upskill people so that we don't have a situation where Detroit was decimated because people were left behind. And Detroit's coming back. But I think we have a way to get in front of this now. We have the insights and the technology, and it is the right thing to do if you're a large employer in the community, that you're looking at this and the impact of society if people are left behind, the impact to the economy.
Well, I'll just say, I think the U.S. is in a precarious situation, right? Because if we're really shifting, and we're not pushing people out to gig jobs, they're going on their own. But in that construct, our employee base is the least competitive, right? We have the highest standard of living, and we don't have healthcare. Compare that to the global economy that they're actually competing in. And many, many countries have that taken care of and have a lower standard of living. And their education systems have stood up. A lot of people don't realize that 90% of all scientists that are alive, have ever lived on the planet, are alive today. There is so much more education going on out there in the rest of the world that we don't fully appreciate where we are in this kind of exponential curve. And I think we absolutely have to be thinking about these things and have to push on it. Government's not going to do it. I'm not sure that corporations recognize it either, though. I see a lot of organizations that don't understand where we are and are doing business as usual like they have for 50 and 100 years.
And I would argue that everybody has a role to play. There is a role for government to play. There's a role for businesses to play. Certainly the individual, as we talked about earlier, has to be motivated, but they also have to know what skills they need to be working towards, and they need some help. It shouldn't be everyone out there on their own. So it's really going to take, all constituencies working proactively towards the future that we want to see.
So let me share with you some audience comments, because we've gotten a lot of feedback. One, they seem to like you guys, so that's great. I would love to hear if you guys want to talk more tech, because we're still getting a lot of technology, regulatory compliance, whether it's in the domestic United States, some of the regulation, or globally the regulation in terms of how that impacts our agility. And if you all want to hear more technology use cases, I would love to hear you all hit the heart button and tell us if you want to keep staying on the technology concept, because I think the curiosity on the agility factor is they're going to want some more use cases on that. And so, yes, we're seeing lots of yeses. So can we talk a little bit more? Because I know that Vinod, I think, is out there, and he has been adding in phenomenal thought leadership, of course, from IBM as well as CTO, leveraging AI, leveraging how can technology be an enabler for the agility factor. Sheri, I'll defer to you first.
Yeah, so really great topic, great question at IBM. We've been doing quite a bit in terms of bringing AI and machine learning to various aspects of decision-making and organizations. And in particular, I've been focused in the area of talent management and bringing that capability to people-related decisions. One thing that I think is absolutely essential in any application of AI and machine learning is to bring domain experts together with data scientists. So I think it's very risky to, for example, just put a bunch of data scientists in a room to go solve a problem. And yeah, they're going to, analyze data and find relationships and try to maximize predictability. And that's kind of the role. But it's really important to bring, in this world, for example, HR expertise. So what we've done is we've actually teamed up industrial organizational psychologists and HR experts with our machine learners as we're developing this technology. So leveraging the decades of knowledge that we have about making decisions about people and developing people and selecting people, et cetera, to bear in the building of the algorithms. Also bringing the concepts of fairness and minimizing bias and minimizing adverse impact, negatively impacting different groups. Critically important to have that perspective as you're building those algorithms, and bringing that technology to market responsibly and to your decision making responsibly.
I think that to add to Sheri, I think this is a really exciting time. I think it's a really exciting time because the AI is going to help both the individual and the organization at the same time. If we take that growth mindset view, we open things up transparently because we can. So we can show in some type of marketplace environment all the work that's going on. We can give insights, as Sheri mentioned, as to how to move around in that ecosystem to develop yourself, to do the work that you love to do. So that taps into motivation. And then we can get a lot more done because we know people are more productive when they're able to have some choice. So if you do this across multiple enterprises and you're able to use that technology and that matching algorithm to put the right people on the right work, to Sheri's point about data scientists and IO psychologists, data scientists are only as good as the questions that they're being asked. So you definitely need domain expertise to ask the right questions. And if that is baked into that technology, it's the backbone of the technology. We're training those algorithms to get really, really smart. Think of how much more productivity we're going to get. And we're going to stop talking about revenue per head, and we're going to have a lot more of these other metrics that are not only more interesting, but certainly propelling organizations forward. I know I obviously have a lot of passion around that. I'm tired of talking about revenue per head because I think there's probably a lot new metrics that we can be looking at today with the technology that we have.
Yeah, and Kelley, in addition to asking the right questions, which I absolutely agree with, it's also making sure you're using the right data to answer those questions, right? Making sure you've got a complete data set, that you're building your algorithms based on all of the various demographics and populations that you're making decisions about, and not some sliver where if you try to then apply those algorithms to a different population, it's not going to work. So I think that the data piece and knowing the do's and don'ts around how to use those data elements, super, super important.
Yeah, and I love your comment, Sheri, about inclusion and diversity, which is a huge focus at Here Technologies, stamping out bias so that you have, if you do a search on certain opportunities that are available, or you're doing matching, that every qualified individual comes up. That people that weren't self-promoting or marketing themselves or didn't have huge relationships throughout the enterprise are at least brought into that slate, that virtual slate. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that's the holy grail if we could get to ultimate fairness and lack of bias. Whenever you're dealing with human beings, that's a tall challenge. But I think that if we could figure out how to get to that, you can imagine how that would change the culture of organizations.
And bringing diverse perspectives into asking the questions, getting the right data, building the algorithms. I think that's super important as well. Sorry, Steve.
No, it's fine. That's actually, we're seeing that in the gig economy, right? The democratization of work, where it's always a meritocracy. It's always the best person. I would say as far as technology goes, a lot of companies have done a lot of work in digital transformation to get better enterprise installations of their systems. I think when you start to combine that with Internet of Things, you get better instrumentation of what's really happening within organizations. That's when the machine learning stuff's really going to get interesting. We are just at the start of the machine learning piece. And then the other technology I think that's really important that needs to be mentioned is blockchain. It's going to be a crucial piece in the trust equation, right? Digital trust in what your credentials really are, what your experience are. And since blockchain provides the automated contracting mechanism, you can now start to offer secure information that can only be read. It can't be copied, right? So then you can start to get into sharing with machine learning algorithms things that do matching at the next level. So you can start imagining putting together high-performing teams based not only on what problem they're solving, what their skills are, but what their dynamics are that you've actually done on their personality assessments that you wouldn't necessarily want to have out there if it's not secured with something like blockchain.
We got a few different audience interactive pieces here. Giselle Moda, who's traveling to Detroit, Michigan, says that some organizations use AI to surface the client interest and the trends to push up or reskill the needed workers. So we have a lot of dialogue going around on AI, but there's some debate because I think at a core level, you still have to have it. I think Stephanie Thompson said it well, you still have to have the data. So we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about AI and blockchain and digital automation, but holy hell, it's tough just to get the data, to inventory the skills, and then to get a line of sight into the workers, much less the skills, and get that all together because good data is at the heart of any machine learning and AI. So I think to the audience, to help soothe some of the audience conversation with this good, healthy debate, is that we recognize the fact that we need to have good data, and that's not easy to get. Correct?
I think that's true. I think that we today in our HR technology ecosystem, our data is very siloed. So it's sitting in so many places that we need to try to glean insights and clean that data and apply the algorithms to it. To Sheri said, it's only as good as the algorithms that are applied to it. But I think we have to figure out how to get that data out of silos in a safe and secure way, which we haven't talked about, but this is a huge issue. Somebody mentioned, I think in LinkedIn Live, about the regulatory environment as a hurdle. Many of these enterprises are doing business. I know Here Technologies is doing business in 55 countries, all different regulatory environments. These are also hurdles to us getting the data, having the data clean. So I think this will continue to be a challenge for those enterprises that are working across multiple jurisdictions.
Yeah, I agree more. I mean, the globalization of that data, Sheri, I think you spoke to that earlier on the complexity around global data as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the data is definitely a challenge. There's no question, and you need to understand your data and the limitations of it, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's better to work with some data than no data and just kind of guess. But again, recognize what your challenges are and continually close the gaps around the data issues. I think data privacy is also critically important. GDPR, I think, is a good template, as challenging as it's been for organizations to deal with it. They are dealing with it, and I think it really sets some good ground rules around communicating why you're collecting data, why you're using it, how it will be used, and allowing people to opt in. I think once people understand that there's benefits to them opting in and making their data available, they will do so, just as we see in our use of technology in our personal lives. But you have to be upfront and transparent about that.
There's a real opportunity, actually, as we come up with a standard kind of digital resume, right, that takes all that digital exhaust we've had and can actually do it. That has to actually be owned by the individual, but can't be modified, right? So you can't go pad your own resume. So that digital resume is a really good candidate for blockchain. And I think once we get that in place, and the trust organizations will have to be there that kind of curate that for individuals and protect it so that companies can trust that data so that you can use that as value. That actually provides an opportunity for a repository of secure information that could end up buying back our private data, because it's now that would actually provide a construct that eventually could be where you own and release your private data, whereas that's been the Wild West, and you know, you hand over that when you get your Amazon Prime account or whatever now, right? So
Yeah.
I do think the consumer industry of how they analyze consumers is really that level of technology and data is what has to come to the labor market, right? And we're not nearly in the same place as they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and inside, I would say, Steve, inside an organization, HR organizations are talking about the fact that we need to drive a great employee experience. And if you think, you know, marketing's been doing this for a long time, marketing to consumers, understanding their insights. We have to do that for employees because the level of customization and personalization is going to increase the expectation that I have a cafeteria style menu for benefits, because there are 4 to 5 generations in the workforce at the same time. And, you know, a 22-year-old doesn't care about 401k as much as, you know, someone my age. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of treating employees like we treat consumers in the future.
Yeah, and I think we just, so I agree with all of that, the expectations, the consumer grade experiences, et cetera. But I think we also need to keep in mind that when we're talking high stakes decisions, we need to take the necessary precautions. Getting a wrong, you might like recommendation from Amazon or, you know, another retailer is one thing. Being denied a job or work opportunity is another.
Yep, good point.
All right. Well, we're getting more comments in here. I love how Nicholas says, and he agrees with everything you all are saying, especially Sheri, around the legacy data sets. And I think we often think that we've got to start cold, but enriching, as he says, those legacy data sets is really such a big agility point, such a great place to springboard off of. And then the GDPR idea as a good template. I think that's something we all need to look at, because even domestic businesses, when I meet with executives and leaders, they'll often say we're only a domestic business. But in the world of work, everybody is global. We're all global. And that acknowledgement and aha moment has to happen in organizations. And learning about that consumer approach in HR, not just from a user experience perspective, but if you even think about hash IDs and what that's doing with retail. If you don't know hash IDs, you got to Google it. But looking at the privacy that's already exposed at the retail and consumer level, and thinking about that same idea. So I think about it as, how do we make our HR systems and infrastructure and our line of sight more like, and I hate using this example, but more like a Facebook team. Like, Facebook is not about hierarchies, they're about relationships and having that type of line of sight to be able to see those types of teams. And so we've had really good conversations in the live meeting. I really appreciate everybody. I'll remind everybody that you do get 9 SHRM credits and 7 HRCI credits, which is just fabulous. But let's wrap up here. Sheri, help me understand kind of next steps, how folks can get in touch with you, because I see a lot of conversation where folks want to reach out and hear more about these use cases and some of the research that I know you're known for.
Yeah, absolutely. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to continue conversations on these topics. Have a lot of passion around it. Also, if anyone, you know, we've got research out there, as you mentioned, Jen. You can go to our IBM Institute for Business Value site, just Google us, Smarter Workforce Institute, and any topic that anyone wants to follow up on, I'd love to chat about. Also, if you're interested in bringing these concepts to HR and embarking on an HR transformation, absolutely love to talk to you about that. We've got wonderful capabilities within IBM to help. And for those of you interested in workforce analytics, please feel free to check out my book, Power People.
Love the data. All right, Kelley, to you.
Yes, so I can be reached at either Kelley, Steven-Waiss at here.com, certainly over LinkedIn. I have a book coming out with my co-author, Edie Goldberg, called The Inside Gig, How Talent Sharing Across Boundaries Can Tap Capacity and obviously stand up this new way of working. But I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you about Hitch and what we're doing to drive internal mobility in several organizations around the globe.
Awesome. Great. I'm looking forward to that book. And I know you have so much great blogs and research out there. Steven, last but not least, putting astronauts on the moon and reskilling and upskilling, man. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn's your best way to reach out to me. I'm out there. You'll see blog articles and podcasts, and I speak at various conferences. So you'll see me out there. This is a part-time gig, so I'm not looking for a ton of work here because I got a day job, right? But I'm learning a lot from everything that's going on, and it's really an exciting time. And just hold on, because it's going to get crazier, right?
It is. And I just want to thank our interactive audience, from Louise and Diana, Nicolina, Dawn. Like, there were so many amazing interactive points, and oh my God, death to PowerPoint today. It's so refreshing to have these conversations. So special thanks to Enrique Rubio, because this opportunity to network, not just today, but again in December, as well as he's got an HR technology one coming after the first of the year. I mean, that incredible type of networking across the world, so fluid like this, is just a privilege to be a part of. So thank you, Enrique. I need you all to stay tuned. I need you to get your coffee, or if it's after hours across the world, please get your wine and come back and join us at 9:30 Eastern Time, 6:30 Pacific. And we are going to get started then with, next up is the panel 2. We are debunking myths. Technology versus humans. Diana, I think this is all about your human aspect that you want to hear about. So make sure you're there, as well as please ensure you join me in the finale today at 5 o'clock Eastern, when we are talking about the soft skills, the generations, and many of you had questions about that. Please stay tuned, because we've got an immense, copious research on all of those soft skills and the different research and use cases you were looking around that. So with that, Enrique, thank you for a wonderful day. We will close out and see you at 9:30 Eastern. Thank you all.
Thank you.